Welcome, seekers and visionaries, to Oracle Mountain Chats. Here on this sacred virtual peak, we gather a space for oracles to share their wisdom, their visions, and their craft. It all began with a calling I could not ignore. One day, within a vision, I held this conch shell in my hands, and as I blew its resonant note into the world, I felt its vibration ripple across unseen realms. It was a summons, a signal to fellow oracles scattered near and far. I saw that we were on a mountain, vast and towering, reaching into the heavens. At its base, the world buzzed with life, people moving, creating, searching. Yet at the summit, there was stillness, clarity, and a circle of light. There, oracles stood, their gaze focused both outward and inward. They spoke of the energies they felt, the shifts they saw, and the whispers of the unseen. They weren't above the world, they were its witnesses and its guides. From this vision, OracleFest was born, a celebration of connection, insight, and the timeless wisdom that flows through us all. Here we gather as oracles to share the visions Spirit whispers to us, to speak of the energy currents flowing through nature and humanity, and to help guide those who seek answers in a world that often feels lost. So grab a seat, breathe in the mountain air, and join us as we begin today's chat. Whether it's an energy reading, a conversation about our craft, our path, or simply sharing a perspective on the world below, this is where we wait for more oracles to join us on the mountain. What wisdom will the mountain bring us today? Let's find out together. Step into this sacred space where the wisdom of the ages converges with the questions of the present. Beautiful. Welcome back to Oracle Mountain. It feels like so lovely to have Kate Powell here again. Kate Powell was one of the first, you were one of the first one or two OracleFest speakers. I don't remember the exact order of people who said yes, but you were absolutely the first speaker, luminary speaker, who supported me building OracleFest. And so I just want to thank you because I feel like we're coming up on almost a year. Like we started building OracleFest September, October-ish. I was starting to put it together and think about how is this all going to work. And it feels like we've come so far in only 1 year, and that there's so much more community sharing and spreading the word and helping more people that is possible through this amazing vehicle, which is OracleFest. And it keeps circling me back to you. So I'm just grateful for you, and I'm grateful for OracleFest for bringing me, returning back to you. So welcome back to Oracle Mountain, Kate Powell.
Thanks, Kate Graham.
Goodness, we were joking about ancestry visas and spousal visas for the UK because I'm wanting Kate Powell to be in the UK with me, and there may have been a proposal just before this call. So if I look flushed, it's because she said yes.
And then we started imagining what the wedding invites would look like, which would
Too
be, we're
much.
the Kates.
We're the
And then
Kates.
we thought if we started hyphenating our last names, then there would be no way anybody would be able to tell us apart. So,
Kate Powell Graham. She's shamanic, she's nomadic, she loves stories, she loves retreats, she loves Scotland. Okay, who are you talking about?
yeah,
We have so
that's when
many
we start.
similarities.
That's when we start to get into like red Kate versus dark Kate. Like when you see like in the old stories and things like that, like in old Irish and Irish Gaelic or in Scottish Gaelic, like often they would have like, you'd have like
Yes,
the color of the hair would be, or like the,
right.
some like, so
I
you'd be
love
red,
that.
you'd
And
be
that's
red
in
Kate, dark
like
Kate.
old Hindu things too. It's like green Tara, white Tara, depending on like the way that
Yeah,
they show up, right? Like
yeah,
how they're
yeah,
presenting. I love
yeah.
that. I feel like I would be periwinkle blue Kate today. That's I feel soft and emotional. That's what I'm feeling today. Not
Oh,
fair, but that's my vibe today.
I think I'd be shimmery gold Kate today.
Oh, I love that, especially because your earrings. So I see that.
That's part of
I
why I
see
wore
you.
them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
love that. I love that.
Although
So
that might be also trying to call it in because maybe that's not exactly how I'm feeling on the
you know
inside.
what? Say it until you feel it, honestly. I approve of that. That absolutely
Yeah.
makes sense to me.
I've been really sorry, funny little
No.
story. I think this ties in. It might actually even just segue us into more of a conversation. But yeah, I've been stepping into like really like embracing clothing and jewelry as a spell, as a ritual, as a like as an altar space, actually, like in my body as an altar space. And indigenous cultures all throughout the world. And when you look at the old stories that talk, there's such an emphasis on beauty. And when we read them through our modern lens, we understand beauty in a very superficial way. And so I think that's one of the things that often gets critiqued when modern people read the old stories. It's like, why were they so focused on the woman being beautiful? And it meant something so different in that day and age. It actually meant beauty is how we connect with the divine, right? Like beauty is actually how we build that relationship, how we honor how much we receive from the divine, from the earth, from the, whatever. And beauty is what we make. If we make beauty or we dress in beauty, it's a way of giving back to that and to feeding what feeds us, And so it's actually really this beautiful thing. And so I've made something like shifted for me a couple months ago. And I really started feeling like I wanted to get up every morning and like not in any kind of like, it's not beauty. Like I still don't brush my hair like ever. I don't wear makeup, so it's not like beauty in the sense that we think of it, but just like wearing something that's meaningful and that I find beautiful and that was made well, or where I know the person who made it, or I can even name where it came from or who, there's something about that. And so it's more that it's like beautiful because it's relational and it's beautiful because it's meaningful and it's beautiful then also because of how I feel when I wear it. So
Yes.
anyway, I was flying back from Scotland to the US after 11 months of being overseas. I flew back to the US a week ago and I was in the airport in Dublin and I was in the line for the toilets. And there was a older woman in front of me in line and I was wearing this, I'm not wearing it right now, obviously, but this felted wool hat that I'd made that is really, I think it's beautiful. And I don't just say that because I made it, but just again, the meaningfulness that, and it's a really unique thing. And so she was like, "Oh my God." She was like, I love, and I think I was even wearing these earrings. Anyway, she was like, I love your hat." And then she kind of like looked me up and down and I had like dressed for beauty, even though I was flying on the airline. And so it was still comfortable. It wasn't anything fancy. It wasn't, but I dressed with that feeling, that intention in mind. And she was like, yeah, so she says the hat, and then she kind of like looks me up and down, and then she's like, "Actually, I love your whole." And I like saw there was this moment where she kind of paused, like something stuttered in her, like something she was recognizing something, but she didn't know what to name it. And she goes, is this your traditional wear?"
Love that question.
And I was just like,
Sort of.
sort of, right. And in my head, I'm kind of like, that's so funny. I wonder where she thinks I'm from. But, it said something to me, and I couldn't tell from her accent exactly where she was from. But, what in today's world, in today's racialized world, we would call white, older white woman. And so there was something in her that recognized something very specific in the intention that I addressed with that day and in the way I've been slowly shifting to carrying myself. And the thing that I think is so heartbreaking and I think points to this need for ancestral healing work that you and I often do with folks, right? Is like that those of us of European descent and particularly European settler colonial descent, right? Like those of us of European ancestry who are not from Europe, probably several generations back, have lived in other countries, um, don't see beauty as being and culture and traditional wear in that way as being something that's ours.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, and I wasn't wearing anything. There was nothing I was wearing that was like culturally appropriative. There was nothing that I was wearing that was like quote unquote indigenous or not even quote unquote that was indigenous from another country. It was just an intention, that I was holding in the types of clothing I decided I'm starting to surround myself by and wear and, all of that kind of stuff. And, and it was such a beautiful and like slightly silly moment, and also then just really pointed to me to the heartbreak and the grief that I think we see that and we don't think that we deserve that in some way, or we
Mhm.
don't feel a connection. Like we don't feel like that comes from our culture, And I remember like growing up in elementary school, they'd have like International Day and people would wear all these beautiful clothes and bring all these foods in. And I was like, oh,
Mhm.
this is so cool. Or even in textbooks, they'd be talking about culture and you would be picturing people, clothing, songs, stories, food from other music from other countries,
Mhm.
and not there was nothing of like as someone born and raised in the currently called United States, there was nothing of like my white there was none of that,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And so you can see where cultural appropriation starts to happen because the instinct for that, the desire for that, the hunger for that is still within us.
Yes.
And if we feel like we don't know where to find that in our own cultures, we look elsewhere.
The
And
longing for belonging, right?
belonging for belonging and more even than belonging, the longing for beauty,
Yes.
the longing for connection, the longing
Mhm.
for meaning
Yeah.
and something meaningful,
Yeah.
And
And
that
beauty
and I
for the
think when we
sake of it
have
rather
those
than for like
things,
approval, right? Like
right,
that's often a North American way of looking at beauty. It's for like status
it's a
approval.
status symbol,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Safety, women, the more beautiful you are.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, hold on one second, sorry.
Of course.
Yeah, sorry, thank you.
Of course.
Yeah. So yeah, I think when we have, yeah, status symbols, safety, women, it's kind of this whole peacocking, like, which again in the natural world is actually male, but
Mhm.
certainly where in places where for women, whether or not you can get married determines whether or not you have actual safety in the
Mhm.
world, right?
Mhm.
Like beauty suddenly becomes this weapon, this tool, this
Mhm.
um, yeah, this way of kind of buying your way into a false belonging, a false sense of
Mhm.
safety. Um, and yeah, and so there's something about, yeah, but I think when we have beauty, real beauty, and when we have meaning, then we have belonging,
Yes.
actually,
Yes.
you
We
know.
can walk, there's a shamanic concept of like walking in beauty, right? Like walking with the earth as it is beautiful and being in recognition of that outside and within yourself. And I think you would find it in a lot of various cultures. That's why I say shamanic, just because it's kind of like some umbrella, but there would be similar beliefs in a lot of different religions as well that just aren't defining it as such. And so we are in this like I think there's like a lot of people who are turned off to the idea that life is beautiful as well because we are in some sort of dark age. I would describe it, and so I think that I've been saying to a lot of people recently who are talking about how terrible they feel the world is, that actually like our greatest rebellion is to bring back ideas that we are missing because that's obviously missing in our collective mind and hearts for many people to be feeling this way. And so it's like our best revolution. And I wonder, now that I'm just kind of tangenting off of this, I wonder if there are like similar, if you go look through the dark ages, the periods that come after, there is like a celebration and a light and a joy and an art and a spirituality that sort of has come from the like lack of faith and hopelessness. So I've personally been like, this is going to be great. And people are like, we're not there yet, Kate,
Yeah.
please don't rush this process. We need to heal and feel this, but seeing in as an oracle does, I'm seeing into the future a lot of like there's a lot of cool things that can come out of this destructive breaking apart of patterns and not seeing things in a beautiful way. What comes out of that, right, if we allow it?
Well, and I think too, darkness is beautiful too. And
Is
so I think, again, there's also this question, I would say too, in those moments where we assume that beauty looks like light.
uh-huh.
I mean, first off, what internalized racism might be
All
in that
right.
Wah, wah. Um, but also like kind of this sense that, yeah, that true beauty is about trusting the process, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like true beauty is found in trusting that the cycles of the seasons, right? Like there, winter comes,
Hmm.
shorter days come, right? Like the darkness is here, and that is no less beautiful than when the blossoms are all out. It's
Hmm.
different,
Yeah.
but it is still beautiful.
Yes.
And so, I think for me, some of what bridging that gap is for us right now, because I think there is a lot of bypassing that can happen, and we do have to be really careful about that. But even if we're in the mess, right? Like you hear that whole no mud, no lotus phrase, right? That like
Hmm.
it's from the mud that the beauty comes. But what if the mud itself is also beauty?
It is an integral
You
part
know,
of, it's a
it's
necessary part of.
right. And in fact, it's actually the whole cycle
Hmm.
that then is actually what's beautiful.
Yes.
And it's not the individual components that are what's beautiful. It's actually the whole thing.
Yes,
So it's
exactly.
not the individual threads. I'm wearing this woven shawl right now, right? And I mean, the individual threads have their own beauty, sure,
Hmm.
but on their own, they're just threads.
Hmm.
And they might be beautiful threads, but there's something about the way they're woven together that then amplifies the beauty, right? So it's the whole thing
Yeah.
that's actually beautiful. And so we do have to zoom out periodically and look to that big picture to be able to keep the beauty. But it's also not just about looking to the future. It's also about like what's beautiful in this moment,
Hmm.
what's beautiful about feeling the feelings. Like,
Hmm.
how can we actually I think it's so easy. And I think we all sort of inevitably have to kind of go through this, but maybe we don't have to. I don't know. That when we start doing healing work, at first it feels heavy and really fucking hard. And like, we're kind of in the like ick
Hmm.
of it. And that's almost a badge of honor, right? Kind of this like,
People are very proud of the Dark Night of the Soul and the title
right.
that comes with that of
Yeah.
the
And the
warrior. People really
challenge and
love
the
to
struggle and the,
fight.
right. Yeah. And we do, and people talk about this in healing circles too, right? Like we get to survivor mode. And this is sort of following the trajectory of initiation, right? We have to actually get disconnected. We have to go into the dark. We have to survive something in the dark. But we can't stop there. That's actually an incomplete initiation if we were to stop there. So then it's that we have to come back again. And that's not easy either. And
Hmm.
that actually requires a certain challenge.
Hmm.
And and there's this dance between the going and the coming back and kind of um that helps us find our way to the place where eventually we kind of end up. And if you can even say that, because initiations are actually ongoing, but it's yeah, so there's this um yeah, that healing, and you reach a point, I think, in the journey where the healing itself doesn't have to feel heavy. And
Yes.
in fact, there's actually a joy. Oh, wow, I'm feeling huge grief right now. I love when I feel huge waves of grief.
Hmm.
Like, beautiful, how cleansing, and again, that doesn't mean that it feels good in the moment. Like you and I have talked about this before. I think in my last Oracle Mountain chat, I even talked about that image I had of the heart that was bleeding and all the swords stabbed in it and all of that stuff, right? So you know, like it doesn't feel great. And yet, like I can hold it with the sense of like, this is a beautiful, beautiful, sacred, precious moment.
Hmm.
And so it moves through faster,
Yeah.
actually. It doesn't feel as heavy and it doesn't feel I'm not in struggle and challenge and all of those things. I'm just kind of like riding the waves of it.
Yeah. You know,
And
I, oh, okay. I was like,
okay,
no, you're
okay.
on a really great tangent. Finish your thought. I'm really relating to what you're saying because, and I don't know how much really I've shared of this publicly, but in my early 20s, I was in a very, very, very dark mental place. It was extremely difficult for me to get through any day. And, but most people didn't know this because of the bypassing that I think was in my mind expected of me to be able to show up, be present, and try to look like everything is cool, and then just try and sleep away or try and deal with the intense feelings going on. At a certain point, I felt so out of answers and out of, I've been trying for years to try and resolve what was going on. and taking all the things that all they recommend. And I've changed my diet and I've done the CBT and I've had counselors and I've been doing yoga like crazy. I was eating so amazingly. I was eating like organic paleo. Like I was on my things, right? I was really overachievingly trying to deal with my suffering in like kind of a hilarious way to look at it now, because it was obviously a pressure that was needing to be resolved, rather than more attention being focused on. All that
Yeah.
to say, I'm not anti-medication in any, like by any stretch. It saved my life when I had seizures. I absolutely think many people require it, and for mental health things, I don't say people should or shouldn't, go towards that. It's like very much a personal choice. For myself, I needed to be on medication for about a year or so, um, really to protect my safety, because I was like, I'm really doing my best. And I just, no one else has given me any other, this is the best thing I can come up with. But I really felt disappointed by not being able to cry. I didn't cry that whole year. And it
Mm.
really upset me in a weird way where I couldn't even cry about it. And as I got off the medication, because I felt ready, I felt like, I only ever saw it as a short term for me. I really just wanted to get on top of things so that I could get the lifestyle and everything back in order. And as I started, in those times, I was getting all these dreams of doing healing work. So that was very affronting to what I was currently doing. It was very different than what I was currently doing. So it was very scary. It felt like, I always would say to people, it felt like my visions came in like a 10-ton truck. It's not as nice as you think it is, because people will be, oh my God, it's so good. You at least know what you want to do with your life. Like, yeah, try telling me that, I couldn't see it that way, because it just felt so heavily different than who I saw myself as. And as I was starting to, get off of the medication and I started crying again, people would like laugh at like how excited and proud I was that I was able to feel my feelings again. And I was crying over little things. And I was like, oh my God, I'm so glad I'm crying. And they're like, are you going to be okay? They thought I was worse off then, right? They thought I'd
Yeah.
really lost it at then. But that was me finally feeling like I was coming back to myself in a real way. And I find that a lot, that if I talk to someone who has not felt their emotions in a long time, they forget actually the freeing feeling it is, even to be in the uncomfortable, tearful, oh, you're crying and you're in public, like all those things that we worry about. And we're, even my heart racing, I'm like, wow, I'm really feeling something going on here. And I label what I used to label as anxiety entirely differently now. It's like a signal and a warning. And I'm like, oh, there's something in the bushes. Like, what is going on? And I'm trying to figure it out. And I'm so curious. And when you were talking about the circle of like this cycle of initiation, that is what a lot of them have been on these stages. And I tend to see it like a spiral. So as you get tighter and tighter into that spiral, it's very familiar. It's almost holding you. You see up to, it's like almost if you could see it as a downward or an upward, you're either rising or you're seeing it all kind of around you as I've been there, I've been there, I've been through this again. I know what this is about. And that familiarity, because you've been looking at it as a journey, starts to soften things. And it doesn't need to feel, I really don't feel afraid at all of when I have a growth edge or a healing edge. I get excited that I'm getting closer and closer to the center, and I don't think I'll ever reach it. And I have such joy in that too.
Mhm.
But it's not at the start that you feel that way ever.
Yeah. And again, I don't know how much of that, I think in this day and age, and particularly again, for those of us who don't come from more intact cultures,
Mhm.
um, I think that that probably is an inevitable phase that
Mhm.
we go through in our healing journey.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's necessarily inevitable to being human. And in fact, I think
Yes.
that was part of the purpose of culture and
Mhm.
particularly of story,
To make peace
because
of these
so
transition times, like for people to have more understanding. Is that what you mean?
yes,
Yeah.
yeah, context,
Yeah.
So imagine you hear, let's see, what's a good example? Okay, well, we'll say Cinderella or Sleeping Beauty. Those are actually both stories of initiations.
Hmm.
And in their old form, not their Disney form, not their whatever,
Was
but they,
Cinderella initiating into like womanhood, like
Mhm.
sovereignty?
That's the
Like,
story of puberty.
yeah. Oh my gosh. Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh,
So,
wow.
especially one of the original versions of Cinderella, or an old one version, there's many versions of Cinderella around the world. One version is Mossy Coat.
Hmm.
It's an old English story of, and it's very similar. It doesn't necessarily have like the glass. Well, it does actually have a slipper. But anyway, um, yeah, I'll tell it, I guess, simply. So yeah, so the story of Mossy Coat. So it's a young woman, beautiful, of course, because, but that doesn't mean what we think it means, right? And her mother is a little bit of a wise woman, cunning woman. And they live in, a small village, rural village, don't have a lot of money. And there's this creepy kind of magician, dark magic-y older guy who like takes a fancy to Mossy Coat. And he comes around and demands to marry her. And so her mother tells her, and she does not want to marry him, obviously, but she's clearly starting to come of an age. She's young still, though. And her mother, unbeknownst to her, her mother has been weaving her this mossy coat, to go. And the girl, I believe, is actually unnamed until this point in the story. So anyway, unbeknownst to her, her mother has been working probably since she was born, collecting moss and weaving this beautiful mossy coat with this woven golden thread, I think. And so anyway, it's been a while since I like refreshed the story, so I'm sort of trying to pull it out here. But yeah, and so the first time the man comes to the door, Mossy Coat goes and tells her mother, and her mother says, tell him to come back tomorrow and tell him that if you're going to marry him, you need a beautiful dress that's of all the colors of the bird's feathers and shoes to match, right? And so she goes and tells him that, and he kind of does his creepy eyeing her up and down, taking her measurement, and he's like, heh, 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 and goes off. Comes back the next day with the coat and the slippers. And so it's the ones that she'll marry him in. And then she goes to her mother, completely distraught, and she says, he's brought the things, they'll fit me perfectly. What do I do? Mother says, now you tell him you need something to go away with him in after the wedding, and so you need some sort of outfit for that and shoes for that. So she goes and she tells him that at the door, and he goes, hey, 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 and goes away. And anyway, comes back the next day, knocks on the door, and gives her the things. And so the mother says, and she goes distraught. She says, he brought those. And the mother says, okay, tell him you need one more night, because the mother knew that if she worked through the night, the mossy coat would be done. So she said, tell him you need one more night to pack all your things and you'll be ready. Tell him to come tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., whatever, and you'll go away with him. So she tells him that. The man leaves. Um, and so, yes, and Mossy Coat, of course, is distraught. The mother tells her, go to bed, and this is another thing, too. And a lot of the stories sleep, right? There's something in the young person who's getting initiated has to go to sleep first
Mm,
for the real magic to happen.
mm,
So she goes to sleep. The mother finishes the coat. The next morning, before the man comes, the mother has her pack up all her things, and then she gives her the coat. And it's this beautiful coat, yeah, made of all these different mosses. And she says, you can put it on, you wish to where you want to go, and it will take you there, or it will take you where you need to go. So the young woman puts the coat on, goes out the door, takes a few steps, and is suddenly transported to this castle. And there's a prince, of course, in the castle. And anyway, she gets a job in the scullery. She's basically, and so this is where the Cinderella piece starts coming in. So she's cleaning and she's covered in ash, and the other servants are always giving her a hard time, but she keeps her shoes and her dresses hidden, and she keeps her mossy coat hidden.
mm,
And um, and then there's going to be a ball. And so there's 3 nights to the ball. And so again, here's these threes, right? These
mm,
things happen in threes. So there's 3 nights to the ball, and she ends up using the coat to get her. She gets dressed because she can't go. So anyway, everybody else, all the other servants go. Everybody leaves. Or no, she manages to put the servants to sleep this time. That's right. And then she puts on her beautiful dresses and she goes to the ball. And of course, nobody recognizes her, but the young lord, the young prince, like falls in love with her, of course. And yeah, and so she loses the slipper. There's that whole thing. Um, and then, in sort of the more typical Cinderella, eventually they find her because the shoe fits perfectly, because that was part of the whole thing, in the lead up, right? And then she ends up getting married to him. So, but what I love about the Mossy Coat version is that it's much clearer that it's the story of initiation, because
mm,
moss was used as menstrual, moss can actually hold
Oh,
immense amounts of fluid.
right.
So long, long ago, moss was what young women were
Oh,
using when they started bleeding.
right.
So there's not only then like sort of the spiritual and sort of other teachings of moss, right? To kind of like moss, its ecological role in the system, which is to like come in, when things are kind of bare. It's really resilient. It's anyway, yeah. There's a lot of different pieces to that. But then but then there's also this piece that moss was used for diapers. It was used for, menstrual blood. It was used for all of these other kinds of things. So suddenly you're seeing an actual coming of age story, right? And so there's a lot more like cultural memory, I suspect, coded in that. But um anyway, yeah. So I started telling, yes, this, so these, many of these stories that we grew up with are actually stories of initiation. But
Mhm.
when you're young, what's beautiful about those stories is that when you're young, you're just enjoying the story.
Yes.
And as you get older and you need the knowledge is there. And
Hmm.
you start to learn, you'd have maybe mentors, you'd have guides, elders in the community who would also help you learn what the meaning was.
Hmm.
But it would have just been baked into sitting around the fire and hearing these stories. So then when things start happening in your own life, you have a context for them because you've grown up with these stories and you might not have known what they meant when you first heard them. But as you become ready for the knowledge is coded there for you
Hmm.
and you have the context for it.
Yeah.
And so it again, it doesn't make, initiations are meant to be challenging. You're meant to not be sure you're going to survive them. And in fact, most of the stories also include some sort of death and dismemberment that starts to happen. That one doesn't necessarily, but there are a lot of others where, and that one might actually be somewhat of an incomplete story because
Uh-huh.
often in the if you can really find some of the oldest versions of the fairy tales that we can find, often there's actually once she got married to the prince, there's actually probably more story after that.
Yeah.
Because in initiation, the marriage is the initial encounter.
Hmm.
And then there's usually some kind of separation. They get lost from each other in some kind of way, and they have to go
Learning
through more
lessons.
trials
Yeah.
before they can come back together.
Which is typical. I mean, who lives happily ever after? Ever.
Right,
It's
right.
funny. I mean, I just want to say you're so perfect for the pillar of story. And I didn't even mention earlier, but I was like, oh, you're just going to prove it in form. And you've done so brilliantly. So Kate is going to be joining myself and Arwen Lynch Poe and Tony Ghazi. I'm not sure if you saw Tony Ghazi speak about channeling. He channels praying mantis beings, really vibrant. Lovely, lovely. And so we have a few more Oracle Fest news speakers joining us as well, but these are our returners. Arwen is going to be speaking at the Reflection Podium about archetypes. I'm going to be speaking about ancestors. Tony is going to be speaking about channeling, as all of these are important for reflecting in some kind of way, reflecting what's in our consciousness, right? When we think about channeling. And then Kate is going to be bringing story and the pillar of story. So you're just so good. You just naturally fit it so well. It was like zero question in my mind when I saw that one was story. I was like, Kate's in. That's it. That's happening. And B, what I was going to say is I've been reading, doing some relaxing, my clients, because we do work together, they find my voice soothing. And there's something very comforting about hearing from me, no matter what it is I'm saying, apparently. I was like, well, that's interesting. Maybe I'll just make some little fairy tale readings for people to be able to listen to old stories and just sort of have this soothing way of connecting to my voice without it being learning, without it being a specific, like they have to get something out of it, and yeah, and I've just wanted to do that for a while. I also have some very special little kiddos in my life here and there, and so it's kind of like a way for me to be like, "Hey, parents, pass this on to them, and then they'll remember, Auntie Kate, how nice." Um, so I've been reading these grim fairy tales, and I'm like, maybe not all of these are right for the children, but the thing is, we've all come from cultures where we've had these, what seems like darker stories. And as a child, you are just taking it in as it is. It's not necessarily the scariest thing ever, but a lot of them really do end in death. Or there are these gateways, like these passageways that people have to, like a threshold to cross over. And I was reading the 12 Dancing Princesses. And the 12 Dancing Princesses, there's a lot of people who fail at trying to figure out how the princesses are dancing all night. No one knows how their shoes are so worn out by dancing every night. And then finally, this man is able to have this like invisibility cloak and be able to cross the threshold. And so it's very interesting to be like, he had to like separate from body and identity to cross into the spirit realm that they are, that they are venturing to. And that they weren't really sure. Oh, something feels like it's still happening. Okay, we're not really sure. It was so interesting to me. But a lot of these stories, they do end in like, oh, and then this person died, and then the rest live happily ever after, or like the rest danced in the castle after this person died, or and then this person died. The end. And it makes a lot of sense because there's a sense of closure to that maybe we don't get when we're in these sort of pacifying stories, the way that we sort of make children's stories safe for not bringing up tough emotions or things like that. Anyways, it just made me think of that. Yeah, how many of these grim fairy tales are grim.
Yeah, and it's not just making it safe for kids, right? Like we're so focused on antibacterial and antimicrobial, right?
Mm.
And oh, your feet hurt. So instead of building up more strength in them, put more padding in your shoes. And
Mm.
oh, you're like slightly uncomfortable about the temperature. Great, let's crank up the AC or crank up the heat or so we've we're making the walls thicker between us and the world, and we're
Mm.
trying to control our environment more and more and sanitizing it, right?
Mm.
And
Like trying to remove discomforts.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then we're wondering why everybody has allergies now and why and it's like,
And
and again,
anxiety because we're
like
afraid of
getting
the
into
feelings.
well, and also on a very practical nervous system level, it actually makes sense
Mhm.
because anxiety comes when we're not sure we trust ourselves to be able to
Yes.
respond to something.
Yes.
And we're weaker, we're less
Mm.
skilled, we're literally less able to respond to challenge,
Yes.
actually, the
Yes.
more we kind of pad and make everything safe.
Hmm.
And so the anxiety might actually be pointing to something accurate and true.
That's what I always felt. I was like, I don't think this is completely made up the way people say it's in your head. Sure, it's partly in my head. But, I find this of depression. I was genuinely depressed because I was genuinely upset. I genuinely did not like aspects of my life. And until I faced those with a certain bravery and gusto to say, well, we got to make a shift. Otherwise, I'm going to keep feeling this way. Nothing really shifted and changed. And a lot of times people are, when they're focused on the external, it feels like we're just passing the buck, right? But the challenge is like, okay, that's my internal state. No matter what we're shifting, okay, there has to be some internal change that also needs to be, and for me, a lot of it was actually feeling what I'm feeling. What is that saying? Well, what is this
Mhm.
about? If our body and symptoms are sending us signals, what's the signal trying to communicate? Am I just not getting the messages?
Mhm.
And people feel that in a spiritual journey as well, because they'll be, I was just speaking with a client recently about embracing the idea of curiosity versus fear, because I got a little annoyed, I'll say a little annoyed by the industry, because there are metaphysical practitioners, there are ghostbusters, there are mediums who go in and actually continue the stories of fear for people when it comes to communicating with spirits. And so this client had been told there was hundreds of spirits in her house. So she no doubt felt overwhelmed once she heard that there are hundreds of spirits in her house. And she struggled to believe that she was able to communicate or she was getting the right messages from them. Da, 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 da. Even if that were true, does that person need to know it in order to feel at peace in their home? And they called the person to feel at peace in their home and to understand why they felt so off kilter by spiritual energies in their home. But it confirmed fear stories and left with no solutions. And so
Mhm.
when I was chatting with her, I thought, well, hey, you're actually really good at talking to spirit. So what if you just opened up the floor for a conversation if you really felt like something was intrusive, instead of the feeling like they're invading you. Because what an uncomfortable feeling is that, to feel attacked, psychic attack. That's a word that gets floated around, right? And I used to say the same thing with the empath program I used to teach. It's like, you know, are we really wanting to tone down how much you can feel and sense? I don't think so, but really to trust yourself to be able to feel and continue to sense and process those feelings and senses as information. That's more the barrier that we're actually, it's not to make the world quiet, and it's not to turn down how much we feel, but that's
Yeah.
how we approach it when we're scared of what is on the other side of those big feelings, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, anyway, little rant over, but it's really rampant, and you see it in spiritual communities all the time. It's not like everyone's learned this lesson all at the same time, but I happen to have seen it this way, to be able to try and help. Thankfully, I would say this client is now feeling a lot more chilled out by the idea that she has the power to interact with or not as needed. And that there's different stories that I felt, oh, that really, really brings a drama here that wasn't necessary.
Yeah.
And we were able to just turn down the sensational aspects of it, to be with it more. And probably if we were in another culture that had had the context for people passing on and how we relate to that better, that would have been much easier to bring oh, you remember the story about the rabbit, and it would have been a bit easier to log that. But you're right. I mean, she grew up in a very, very Christian household, and so the stories are limited for what her experiences were versus what she was taught. It's difficult to bridge that gap when community is not around you who gets that. So thankfully I received the call. But yeah.
And in fact, like we are meaning making creatures, we are
Yeah.
story creatures.
Yeah.
And so if we don't have the stories that help us make sense of what's happening, then we will either make up stories
Yeah.
or supplant other stories in. And so stories can do just as much damage in
Mm-hmm.
terms of actually alienating us from what's happening.
Yes.
Um, and so we have to, yeah, I think, part of why I think working with stories in conjunction with healing work is so important is that we start to and not just like I think a lot of times when people hear the word stories in conjunction with healing work, they start thinking of like the stories we tell ourselves and mindset work, and like that there is a time and a place for both of those things for sure, because I think those are interconnected. But that's where I'm talking about, like, what are also the other stories? What are the cultural stories? What are the stories we're receiving from our external world, from our communities,
Mm.
that are informing the stories we tell ourselves about what's happening or helping us give context to what's happening?
Yes.
And, yeah, exactly. Children growing up would have been used to death
Mm-hmm.
because it wasn't as removed as it
Mm-hmm.
is in our modern cultures. And again, particularly, in a racialized world, what we would call white cultures.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so it wouldn't have been as weird to hear a story where a character drops dead.
Mm-hmm.
And then as you get older, you start to learn too that initiations, that there's different forms of death. There's physical death, but then there's also what we might call in modern day ego death, right? And initiations are all about ego deaths, and not in the sense of like dissolving ourselves so we can become oneness because all ego is bad, because that's another thing that just drives me up the wall sometimes in our modern healing cultures, that especially because most people who glom onto that are people who already struggle with boundaries and don't usually struggle with oneness. And, so then you start getting into these spiritual practices that are telling you to negate your ego and just dissolve into oneness and not have desires, preferences, needs, willpower, everything else. And it's like, that's not, that, please don't. um, but ego, sense of like, and actually, let's just stop calling it ego death. I'm going to stop calling it ego death. So in this context, it would be more like role death, or it would
Mm-hmm.
be, I was just talking to you before the call, this idea of like the graveyard of past selves, right? And like that as we step through thresholds, as we move into new phases and seasons of our lives, which include new responsibilities and roles within the community, right? And in our relationships, that old versions of us can't come along. And that there has to be a some sort of ritual to honor that version of ourselves because it wasn't bad or wrong.
Yeah.
It served its time and it's time to lay it to rest. So there would have been death, grief
Mm.
rituals, probably most likely, like woven throughout life. Because each time we're stepping into something new, it means we're also some other thing is dying off. That whole every yes is a no to something else, you
Yeah.
know? And so it's not about leaving them behind necessarily, though sometimes you could use the metaphor of the snake shedding its skin.
Mm.
But I think too, again, in today's world where we're used to being fragmented, when people hear that, we often think, great, I've got to cut that part of me
Hmm.
off and like leave
Yeah.
it behind.
Yeah.
And then we end up more fragmented. So it's not about that. It's that that part of you will always be with you, but it's no longer the predominant part of you. It's no longer the most forward-facing part of you. So many people right now are moving through because we don't have initiations that get completed. We don't have rites of passage. So many people are moving through the world now, and their child is still like at the steering wheel,
Yeah.
not their adult self. There's some circumstances the adult self might be at the steering wheel, but then like something challenging comes up and the child gets behind the steering wheel and the child's freaking out because the child doesn't know how to drive
Yeah.
and
And
it's
shouldn't.
that responsibility, right?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
child is like not supposed to actually be handling that.
Yes.
But their nervous system got
Yeah.
frozen, at whatever age that was, because of a trauma.
Hmm.
So now, whenever they face a similar type of thing that has a similar resonance, that child comes forward,
Hmm.
because that's when the freeze happened.
Yeah.
So you have to integrate that child in and let that child come to rest, which is a form of death, actually, in a way, so that then the adult can actually start to come forward
That's kind of
in.
what it feels like in hypnotherapy or in inner child soul retrieval work. There's a similar experience I have of like, I'm taking this kid from somewhere. This kid was happily living in their past of their beliefs attached to some identity about their beliefs and so that kid was like over there in the life, or in the shamanic sense, it's like they're in I see it as like a lost children cave. And so I'm like taking them from the cave. They were just hanging out in the cave. Like, am I really right to do that? But as soon as they are back in this reality with the participant, like the receiver, my client, whoever it is, I tend to find a sense of like peace and settledness, because they're not meant to stay there and be there locked in the past or locked in the pain. I would say locked in the pain of lost children, locked in the past of hypnotherapy based subconscious beliefs of, oh well, I think that everyone hates me because one time when I was 4 years old, I wasn't invited to this birthday party and it just stuck with me forever, right?
Yeah.
And we don't know because it's just hanging out there in that reality in the back of our minds, absolutely unaware that is affecting us to this day. And as soon as that part comes back, it almost like it melts and dissolves, and that is a death, that is a going away of the identity that lived there. But I always see it as like it's returned and it now gets to take up place in you living your amazing life right now and forward, that
Mhm.
is way more empowering, way more freeing. And the child's like, we get to eat what we want to, and I get to go to whatever party I feel like, I get to have my own parties. That's awesome. Whatever the thing is. And so you're right. It's like such a relief, really, for these parts of ourselves to die. But if we don't actually look at them or let them do that, then they stay in like some frozen is exactly the way to say it. It's like frozen in time, frozen in pain, is the state. And so many people, we're all operating from that. I have that. I mean, there must be so many things that are still caught in our subconscious and in our spirit realms. And yet so many people haven't had any process that helps them with this. So it really must feel scary as an adult to feel all these activated child parts of us in our subconscious, in our not known mind, taking over and panicking. panicking at the wheel is such a perfect visual way of putting that.
Yeah, well, and what I see too in a lot of people, and I've experienced this myself in some ways, I think, but sometimes it's easier to see it in others. Like that's the beauty of, I think, also being a practitioner is that
Yes.
I've been through it and I was guided through it by good teachers and good mentors. And then I also have my spirit guides and my other sort of beyond human team that helps guide me through things. But then when I start to see it in other people, sometimes I get even more clarity on like, oh yeah, that's what was happening then, and that's what was going on there. Um, but let's see, what was that thread? Yeah, so the yeah, so the child panicking behind the wheel. Let's see, there was a thread here. Now I'm panicking
The
behind the wheel.
relief. Yeah, I know.
Oh my God, I can't remember the thread.
I had a
Um,
moment like this right before we started the call.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah.
cathartic for me to witness this in this moment. Like, oh, everything's fine, Kate. Because I was like, no, everything's not fine.
I know, I know.
But we were talking about
Um,
the relief of like letting
yeah,
those child selves and the feeling that people are
yeah.
acting from these subconscious beliefs of those children and panicking at the wheel. And we haven't necessarily retrieved these and
Oh, yes.
with them.
Yeah. So it was also that, yeah. So because we're not even aware that it's a child self, that
Yeah.
it's a frozen child self that's acting, right? Often then what happens too is unbeknownst to us, somewhere in between, like often when I'm working with people, we'll like first have sort of the child, the lost child kind of integration and healing, if we want to call it that. But then we'll have like a middle, almost like often it's sort of adolescent, but it presents as so much more adult because to the
Mhm.
child, it's an adult.
Yes.
And it's often battling with the child. And so
Yes.
this is the thing too, is like we often, because we're so busy trying to push that panic down or to somehow manage that child, that then it's like we end up creating this internal war, actually, where we have this tyrant and we have this victim child. And
Right.
then all we have access to in our lives is tyrant or victim child.
Right.
And, and there's no compassionate witnessing presence. There's no loving mother, father, their
Mm-hmm.
grandmother, grandfather. There's no loving adult that's able to kind of like, because the tyrant doesn't actually want to be a tyrant either.
Mm-hmm.
The tyrant is afraid, but it's got the bluster. It's got sort of that like, um, oh, I'm older now. I'm supposed to know what to do in this situation. And what I'm going to do is make sure that kid stops freaking the fuck out, And so it like slams down on that child, right? But underneath that child, the afraid child or the coping child is actually the kernel of absolute purity and innocence
Yes.
that is in each of us. And so we end up having this inner tyrant that's smacking down our purity and innocence.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and then somehow we're performing adult that has it together. And meanwhile, there's this absolute battle raging within us, you know?
And I imagine when like when cultures who do things like vision quests or rites of passage in these turbulent teenage tyrant times, I imagine that cultures who have that may also have more adults who feel more embodied from these like to be supported to actually go in and face some great challenge within yourself, I think is a very like beautiful and cathartic thing to go through. I personally was just trying to show everyone that I was doing okay and what they wanted and trying to fit your metrics and whatever we're told in North American, like my Canadian culture, it's like okay, you do your schooling and you graduate at some point. That's a rite of passage and what else do we have? What else do we have that's marking that? And what I really needed in my preteen years was a deep connection with spirituality because I was having a big existential crisis. It developed into seizures because my head was literally just trying to contain and understand how everything worked. And then same in those later years, there was a rebellious aspect of me that was completely quieted, that took residence inside and towards myself, that
Mhm.
turned into that anxiety and depression I mentioned that really escalated in severity, that didn't make a lot of sense as counselors were trying to figure me out.
Mhm.
Everything looks pretty decent. What the heck is going on? And it was like really not feeling free to reconcile multiple aspects of who I truly was because I was not seen for those. It was distasteful, it was not appropriate to bring out. And it seems like the combination of story and rites and rituals that help us to let go of these past selves, but also to remember and to understand those parts of ourselves would really have helped me out, would really have solved a lot of those things,
Mhm.
softened the blow anyway of how it was going to feel.
Mhm.
I feel like I want to talk for ages with you,
Yeah.
and I don't want to leave us on an open loop.
Mhm.
But I feel like this
Yeah.
loop could be hours and hours and days
Yeah, it could
long.
be.
I just love speaking with you so much. So,
It-
any final thoughts of how this, like any pieces
Yeah.
that are coming through for you? No rush, just
Yeah.
yeah, putting it out there.
Yeah. 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 Well, just that. Yeah, let me just listen into that for a moment because I kind of had a piece coming up, but let me just kind of make sure that
Yeah,
that's going to kind of help ground this conversation for this moment in time anyway. Because you're right, this is like a very
love it.
big topic.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, well, I think the piece I'll say too, part of where I think we also get failed a little bit in these moments. So not only would the rites of passage help us with these transitional threshold moments in our lives and help us know how to navigate that and give us some context for just the challenge of what we're experiencing and also how to navigate challenge because I think you're right. Like that is the point of all of this is not to feel less, but to actually be more prepared for challenge and not in some like woe is me, life is hard all the time way, but that the more, and I'm on the threshold of middle age now, right? Like I'm 40, so I know there's more middle age to come, but I also feel the opening of it, and have been feeling that for the last couple years. But um, I feel like the best word to describe my experience of the last few years, which has been an initiation in many ways, is being tempered, and I really feel like I'm being tempered into something that is more honed, um, more potent, and also more simple, like more pared down. And there is a stripping away that I feel like is happening. And again, and it's so beautiful, at least so far. I mean, who knows how I'll feel, but to come back to this idea of beauty that we kind of started with, like it is beautiful. And there's a piece to that. And we have to know how to be stripped down and not have that feel like an existential threat. We have to know how to enter pressure. I was reading something yesterday that was like, you know, pointing out how much when we say, "Oh, I'm feeling stressed," like stressed is actually not an emotion. It's actually a way of avoiding explaining our emotional state at the time. Um, it's actually and often when we employ that I feel stressed, what we mean is I feel pulled in a million directions and I've actually lost touch with any sense of how I'm actually feeling.
Yeah.
But at its best, stressed is actually I am being tempered.
Yeah.
I am being invited to recommit to the simplest, most potent, most clear, pared down sense of what's happening.
Like when people
And so,
experience a severe burnout and then they go, well, all I did then was meditate and do yoga every day because I didn't know what else to do. Well, that was like a paring down and simplifying of what was needed for you and not uh you failed and you did the bare minimum. Yeah, I love the way you're putting that.
and that's why I focus so much of my work with clients on that moment of burnout. We actually start our work in burnout, and I tell people, come see me when you're ready to treat burnout as an invitation into initiation, and
Mm-hmm.
you're ready to actually look at your burnout not as our modern society tells you burnout is, but as a jumping off point into initiation. Come on, let's do it. Like that's part of why I say that because that is what that moment is it's the wintering, it's the autumn to wintering of the paring down, getting really essential because you can't keep continuing with things the way they are. And you actually, and there's something that's inviting you deeper. Um, but yeah, so I would yeah, so there's this so stress serves a purpose, right? And so this is all about feeling more human, but where was I? There was a link I was making here to um just kind of wrapping up some of what we were saying about kind of yeah, that dark night of the soul. And maybe that's some of it right there. Maybe we've kind of landed it. But there was one more piece that I was just kind of weave in, which was that yeah, part of the challenge that we face in these times too is that we have a very messed up sense of what right, wrong, good, bad, punishment kind of stuff is. So part of why I think we end up with tyrants, inner tyrants, is because humans, yeah, humans have a tendency towards greed. Humans have a tendency towards power play, towards dynamics that can be oppressive, right? Like we have equal amounts of capacity for that as we do for liberation and compassion and for these other things. But again, that's why you have cautionary tales, and that's why culture was put in place to help us remember how to be good humans, right? And not in the sense of like cutting off and pushing away the shadow bits, but just how to work with them, how to balance them.
Mm-hmm.
And so the piece I was going to say about the tyrant and kind of tying this back to beauty and that purity and that innocence piece, we have to know who we were before we fell apart
Mm-hmm.
in order to be able to kind of weave it all together again. We have to have a bigger sense of who we are. And so that's where restorative justice work and indigenous justice work, from what I've been told, is often about reminding someone of who, and I see this with myself and I see this with clients, reminding them of who they were before the
Mm-hmm.
wound, reminding them of who they are beyond the wound.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not just about going back, it's who are you still when you're not pulling all this internal fuckery and external
Oh,
fuckery, right?
yeah.
And if you don't know who that is, you will feel deeply, deeply threatened.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is, I think, key to initiations because the death and dismemberment that happens in an initiation will feel deeply threatening if you don't have some sense that something bigger is at play and that there's a possibility that you'll come back again.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's something, there is a force that will then remember you.
Mm-hmm.
Because in all the stories, after the death and the dismemberment of the person who's being initiated, something puts them back together again. And they are different than they were before,
Mm-hmm.
but something puts them back together again. And so if we don't have the thing that puts you back together again, and you don't have faith that if you've done the steps right to the initiation, that there is a force that is also initiation is inevitable, remembering can also be inevitable if we've done the initiation right.
Mm-hmm.
And so rupture, repair, right? They're inevitable, actually. They're the drumbeat, right? The hitting and the moving apart, the coming together and the moving apart, the heartbeat, all of it. So this is the part where I think the beauty and the story and the context, like this is kind of where I'm trying slowly, clumsily to like weave them all back together again. But is that, yeah, just this that the reason I think so many people run from the healing work or actually find it threatening, like on a really deep level, because it's not their adult self or it's not even their heart and their soul that have them running from the healing work. It's
Mhm.
actually that tyrant, right? That has been who's also a protector.
Mhm.
Um, and the reason that part of them feels so scared is because it doesn't have trust that after death there's something else,
Mhm.
or there's the possibility of that.
Yeah.
And it doesn't know who it could be beyond that. And
Yeah.
so that's where I think the spirituality piece is so key. I think that's where the story and the context and the culture and the elders and the rites of passage are so key, because all of those help give us that big picture sense. All of those help anchor us in this sense of like, there's more to you than just that one piece. There's more to you than just fear. There's more to you than just wound. There's more to you than just your mistakes. There's more to you, and that even those things are beautiful in the eyes of the part of you that is bigger than that.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Mm, I love that. I'm just going to be with it for a good little moment. Ah, I'm so thrilled that I get to hear more from you.
Thanks, Kate.
General in life, but also that I get to show you off to the OracleFest community, and that any folks in your community who want to hear more at a great depth, because what I notice about the speakers, we can have really in-depth conversations here because there's this connection between us of openness and receiving of like I pick up what you're putting down. And that also when we're sealed in the kind of container of an Oracle Fest podium event, it's like the flow of who goes first and who goes second and how these things sort of bridge, even if you're not watching all these sessions all together. It's so amazing. And so as a story lover, you'll love, the arc that happens through these podium events. And so Kate will be joining us for the reflection podium on September 20th. We have live readings happening at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, which is insights from all the speakers who are able to be there at that time. And anyone from the audience in the Zoom room can show up and ask their question. We're doing something a little different this time, which is actually that anyone can watch live on YouTube during the event. And then if you really want to be in the room, that space is open to the Zoom because I just want more and more people to see it. I don't like that barrier piece for these podium events. And of course, for our larger Oracle Fest event, we do need everyone to be a part of it and take part as like it's quite a big thing that is going to happen. But yeah, that is what we're going to be doing for this next upcoming podium event. So I will share that out with you. That way, anyone who wants to join us in the Zoom room from your community can do so. I just am so thrilled that this is the medicine you're choosing to walk with in this life and that you hold all these stories because they're important. It's very important for us to continue recalling and reviving and remembering. So thank you, Kate, and we will chat again soon. And if people want to get in touch with you, we'll leave your links and things below as well. And we will see you on the 20th.
Thank you. I just want to, as we're wrapping, just kind of
Of course.
quickly, I always loved stories growing up. I just want to name too. It feels important for me to name that and to just honor those who are actually professional storytellers and are really walking with that medicine. I feel like I'm weaving it in, and maybe I'll step into more of that as I continue, because I think as a kid, I've always been a storyteller. But anyway, I just want to, even if I'm not naming them all by name right now, I have some specific people in my head and in my heart right now that I'm just beaming some
Mm.
love out to them. And then also even the ones whose names I don't know. And um, but just that yeah, there's a whole community of people because just like we kind of didn't get into this today, but how it's our society, in addition to forgetting that with this amnesia that we've kind of been talking about in this conversation today, that feeds into how we've forgotten to value a lot of these healers and the professional role of the healer and the guide, the initiation guide. And the same goes, I think, for the culture, the tradition bearers and the cultural carriers, the song carriers, the
Yeah,
story carriers. So I just want to like name that because that feels important too,
it
that
was. We wanted to talk about that. And
Mhm.
honestly, so I'm glad you brought that back.
Yeah, so just briefly weaving that in that yeah, it feels important to just name that these are actually roles for the community
Hmm.
and
Necessary ones.
necessary ones, deeply, deeply necessary ones, and that we as in a world where money is necessary currently for people to have their needs met, that means that we also need to be paying, paying people who are doing that work of remembering and carrying and holding on to these cultural memories. Um, yeah. So
Agreed. Pay your storytellers, pay your spiritual medicine folk, pay the singers, pay the dancers. I agree. It's the only
there
way
is
we're going to thrive.
yeah, because there is a folk element to it, right?
Yes.
Like this stuff is not gate kept. Most of
No.
us who do this work are anti-gatekeeping to a
No.
certain extent. I believe in healthy gatekeeping
Yes.
because that's part of what initiations are.
Yes.
But but in general, there's this idea that this is our birthright,
Hmm.
actually. And I think most of
Hmm.
the people doing this work feel like this is
At their core. Yes.
humanity's birthright. And so, and it is, and it's also a full-time job
Hmm.
to really be carrying this and holding this.
Yeah.
And, back in the day, the village would have taken care of the people doing this work, even if
Hmm.
it wasn't necessarily financially. They would have been clothed, they would have been fed, they would have been housed.
Yeah.
Even if they were nomadic, when they showed up somewhere, the doors would open, the hospitality would happen,
Their skill would be recognized.
their skill
Yes.
would be recognized. And so we have this cultural memory of not paying for these things, but we don't have the cultural memory of supporting and nourishing
Hmm.
careers. We've like forgotten that part. So
Yes.
I just wanted to, something about that felt really important to name as we were kind of closing out here, just because I felt like I wasn't going to be in integrity if I didn't, um, with my words and with my love and with my care, honor the ones who've helped me find stories in this way.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very much important, very much also a reason that I believe Oracle Fest exists and has come to be able to shine a light on many people's offerings so that we can continue to bring more of these, just everyone to the forefront and continuing to like remind people how important, how necessary it is to our well-being, just to our collective holistic well-being, to have these parts of our society turned on and sustaining, right? Not some dull flickering bulb that you remember once a time when you were a kid, but actually something that you can continue to access light from. So thank you very much for putting that out there so eloquently. So Kate, we're going to see each other again. I want you back for an Oracle Mountain chat like tomorrow so we can get into this chat again. But I'll wait.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the space to, yeah, to share
Yeah.
and to see what comes out and see what wants to be spoken and all of that. Yeah.
Oracle Mountain, always giving on Oracle Mountain. Okay, thank you very, very much. We
Yeah.
will see
Thank
Kate
you.
at the Reflection Podium September 20th.